Okay, so here we are. In this video, I'm going to run through some exercises at the end of chapter 4 from the Albright text. First, I'll start with exercise number 1. So this is exercise number 1 at the end of chapter 4. It says VBA can be used to format worksheet ranges in a variety of ways: the font, the interior, the background, the alignment, and others. The recorder can be useful for learning the appropriate properties and syntax. Try the following. Open a new workbook, type some labels or numbers into various cells, then turn on the recorder, format the cells in any of your favorite ways. Examine the recorded code. You'll probably find it sets many properties that you never intended to set. Delete the code that appears to be unnecessary and run your modified macro. Okay, so let's try that. I've got an open workbook here. I'm just going to type in some words. I can type in some numbers. And let's go ahead and go to the recorder format. I'll just kind of put in whatever name here. Macro name is formatting. I'll store it in this workbook. I'll click OK. Now it's recording. And I'm going to select these cells. And how do I want to format them? Let's center them. Let's bold them. Let's put in some fill color. And then for these ones, let's do, let's see, let me try this again. Select these ones. Let me format these. Let me format the text here as orange. Does that come out? A little hard to see. Let's do maybe a darker orange, a little bit better. We'll center them. And maybe we'll do a box. Outside border. And that's it. And then we will stop the recording. And what I want to do is come over here into my book 1 file. I haven't even saved it yet. We should save it. Here's the module. Here's the code that came out of that macro, right? Here's the formatting name that I put in when I created the macro. And here is all of the code associated with that macro. Pretty long. The problem says let's delete the unnecessary code. So let's see. Horizontal alignment center. Yes, we did that. I didn't do any of this. I didn't vertical align. I didn't wrap text. I didn't add indent. No level, shrink to fit, reading order, merge cells false. So all of these I can just delete. So I'm going to select that in the code and I'm going to delete it. And then I did a bold. So this is on the range C7 through G7. So this is my numbers here. I aligned center and then I bolded it. Now I can use this. Notice this is within the with selection statements. I can actually take this out and just do the selection part on this one line. So if I remove the with selection and just type in selection here and then remove the end with, because it's just one line, that works fine. The advantage of a with selection is that I don't have to type selection interior for all of these lines, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the advantage of having a with statement here is that I just don't have to type these two words for 5 lines. So it's saying for all of these lines, add these two words in front of it. And so I actually just took out the width for this particular, because I just need this one line here. Out of all that code that was in here, I just left with one line. And then I'm going to have a line here for the bolding. So there's a lot here that I'm taking out. Let's see, what was this one? Pattern solid and color. Okay, so this is where I changed the color, the interior color of the selection. So I don't believe I need the pattern or the index color. I'm just going to do the color. And why don't I go ahead and just be a little consistent and put this on the same line as this. Take out the width. And again, I don't need these two lines or the end width to change my color. So those are the 3 things that I did here. And now I'm just trying to shorten my code here. These are the 3 lines of code that did what I did. And so what I did is I recorded the macro and I went into my code and just shrunk down the code from the recording. The recording has lots of extra stuff. And I could rerun this and we could see what happens. This down here was with the other range, so C4 to F4. We changed the color, so we don't need that. tint and shade. I think this was theme color accent 2. So this is probably when I changed the color. I did not change the tint and shade, so I can take that out. I centered it, and then I didn't do any of these things. So all of these other things I can take out. And then I did a line. Let's see, selection borders. So here's my borders, diagonal down and diagonal up. And this is the borders edge left. So again, there's lots of other code here. And for purposes of brevity and maybe just for timing, I'm just going to leave it at this. And I've taken out some code. The problem says delete some code and that appears unnecessary and run the modified code. So if I go ahead and run this again, let's pull out another sheet. And what I'll do is I'll just do, what is that, C7 through G7, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there's my code for that. And this is a test on C4. This is a test. I'm trying to recreate what I had before I ran the macro. So now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and run this macro with the changes that I've made, and we should see the exact same formatting as we did in the first sheet. So I'm going to click inside the macro, I'm going to click on run, and look at that. We've got our bold, we've got our centered, we've got our yellow, we've got our orange centered, and we've got our box in here. Is this the same as sheet 1? It looks exactly the same. So notice how, again, the purpose of this exercise is to see how the loading of the code comes in through the macro, and we can always go back from the macro that we've recorded and delete the selections or the parts that are not needed. Okay, so let's go to exercise number 2. The exercise 2, the theme, color, and tint and shade properties of the font object determine the color of the font. Unfortunately, it's virtually impossible to remember which values go with the color. Try the following. It says open a new workbook, type a label, select the cell, turn the recorder on, change the color of the font or the background repeatedly, choosing any colors you like from the color palettes. As you do, keep track of the colors you've selected and then examine the code. You should be able to match colors with the property values. Okay, so let's try that. We'll open a new sheet here and we will type in theme color into our cell. And then we'll come over here, record a macro, theme color macro, stored in this workbook. And we can see it's been created here. Now it's recording. And so at this point, what we'll do is we'll change the color. We can change the text, or we can change the background color. Let's go ahead and change, let me change this. Let's change the fill. So let's try yellow. And there's the color for yellow, 65535, right? So that's how we can find out what color it is. Let's go ahead and change that from yellow to red. And the red color is 255. And let's change the text to blue. And the theme color there, changing the text, is accent 5, or tint and shade. There it is, negative. Wow, look at that number. So that is the color of the text right there, tint and shade. So now we can take out some of these other parts of the code, and we know now what the color is if we want to change the backfill and how to do that. Selection interior dot color equals 65535. We change it to yellow, right? We can even put a comment here that says yellow. We can come down here and we could say 255 is red. And that's one way to help us remember what those color numbers are in our code. So let's clean up this code a little bit and we will test it. So we didn't have a pattern. We can take that out. We didn't do tint shade and pattern tint shade in this code here. Later on, here's the yellow. So we'll take out these other things in the code, just keeping the color option there. And then here's our font, and we'll keep our font the same. This is where I change the formula bar height. I don't need to do that. In fact, I've never seen that in code. That's actually kind of cool. Um, and then we don't need our select statement, so I'm going to take that out. And this macro is just going to use based on what we select, right? So there's no range here. It's going to be whatever we select. Whatever selected before we run the macro is what's going to be affected. So let me come over here and we'll test it. So if I type in this cell, theme color 2, there's the cell. Oh, it looks like I'm still running the macro. Sorry, I forgot to turn stop. So let me stop the macro. And we'll take this guy out, which is just part of that macro. And okay, the macro is now stopped. We've made some adjustments to the macro that we recorded. All we have is the interior color, yellow, and then red, and then the font. So I'm going to go ahead and select this cell in Excel, which is F4. I want to run this macro on that cell. So I'm going to make sure to select that first before I run the macro. Come inside the macro anywhere, put my cursor in it, click on the green arrow, the run button, and sure enough, it's changed the background color. It's also changed the color of the text. And that macro is done. So that's number 2. Number 3, using the recorder can be particularly useful for learning how to use VBA to modify charts. The file chart practice contains a small data set, a chart that is based on it. Open this file, turn the recorder on, change any of the elements of the chart. As you do, write down the list of changes you make, then examine the code and see what changes you make in the code. Let me go ahead and grab that file. Okay, so what I've done is I've downloaded the chart practice file, made that available in Canvas. You can download that in the assignment on Canvas. And it says open the file, turn the recorder on, and change any element of the chart, the type of chart, the title, the axis labels, and so on. And what we're looking for is the changes in the code, right? How the changes on this chart, how are those changes reflected in the code? So what I'll do is I'll start a macro in this file, and I'll call it monthly sales. How about that? Chart. I'll store it in this workbook. I'll click OK. Notice there's a new module down here in the chart practice, and that's the macro I just started. This is a chart practice file. This is a different file than the book 1 file that I've just been working in. I'm in a different file here. Notice it started a module. So here's the module that I've created, and the macro is currently recording. So we're recording. So I'm going to come over here to this chart. I've selected the chart. I've just clicked on it. And let's change the chart type. Let's say instead of a line chart, I want to do a bar chart or a column chart. So if I click on that, I'll go ahead and click on, sure, clustered column is fine. I'll click on OK. And this is the code to change the chart type. Look at that, just one line. It's kind of nice. The activate here was, I think, me clicking on it. And this is the chart type equals column clustered. So that's one change. What's another change we can do? We can change the chart title. So I'm going to come up here. Instead of monthly sales, let me double click on that monthly sales bar so I can edit it. So if I come out again, let me click on it once and then click on it twice to edit the title. Let's do monthly sales for 20. Let's type in a year here, 2020, because we haven't seen June yet. So I'm going to make that chart title difference. And what happens here? Whoa, look at all that code that just got created. Here's the chart title text. This is the one change that I made, and then it added all this other code. Some font information, some color information, right? I don't know that we need this. At this point, all we needed was just to change the title. What's the axis labels? Let's change the axis labels. Can we do that? We can do that change as well if we wanted to. Let's do a date axis. Can we do that? And then what happens there? There's the code for that. So we're changing the category to time scale. We're changing the axis to a time scale. That's where that change made there. And we'll go ahead and stop the recording now. So we have this code, and if I were to shrink the code down, what I would do is I would take these 2 lines and delete those. I would keep the clustered, and I would keep the title change. Notice there's of these 4 lines that I've selected, 3 of them are simply selecting items in the chart, right? Which I don't need. Again, this is kind of the select. I'll keep this title change. The text change. I'm actually changing the text. And I don't need this. I don't need all of this that was added. So I'll come down and erase all of this. And I'm going to change the category type to time scale. That was the other change that we made. And I can delete that one as well, which is the bar on the right that came out. So those are those 3 lines of code that I get from the recorder. Now, let me pause here and make a commentary. Why are we doing all this recording if we can just make these 3 lines of code? The benefit here of using the macro recorder is that if I don't remember what the command is to change the chart type, I can go and record a macro. It will tell me what that code is, and I can use that in my code. If I don't remember how to change the chart title, the text, I can run a macro and it will tell me what that code is, and I can use that code. So the ability in VBA to run a macro is really quite helpful. If there's something that you want to do in Excel, you're not sure how to code it in VBA, you can run a macro, do it in Excel, and then the code will be created for you, and you can use that. Very, very powerful. So that's the purposes, I think, of these first few exercises, is trying to see and make the connection between what we do in Excel and what the code is in VBA, and how to get that code using a recorded macro. Let's do one more problem here. 4.4, maybe two more, 4.4 and 4.5. Previous exercise, this is exercise 4, again at the end of chapter 4. The previous exercise shows how to use the recorder to learn about properties of an existing chart. You can also use the recorder to learn how VBA can create a chart from scratch. Try the following. Open the chart practice, delete the chart, recreate it with the recorder on, and examine the code. Okay, so let's do that. So we've got our chart practice open. I'm going to go ahead and delete this chart. I'm going to select it and delete it, and it is gone. And at this point, I'm going to come in and create a macro. Create chart macro. You can name it whatever you want. I'll store it in this workbook, which is already selected. I'll click on OK. And there is the macro that's being recorded right now. And let's go ahead and come over here and notice it just recorded my selection. I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to go to Chart. I'll do Recommended Charts. And sure, let's use this line chart as a recommended line. I'll click OK. And it's created this chart. And this is the code behind it. So if I wanted to, I can come in here and click once and then click again. And this is monthly sales, right? So I can type that in. I can click outside, and it will create that title. Notice again, it has all this extra code. I just wanted that text, but it does have extra code. And at this point, we can go ahead and stop the recorder, and we can come clean out the code. So I can take out this select statement. We don't need that. Let me do it differently. This is another select statement. Add chart. Okay, this is the add chart code. This is the source, set data source. This is the title select, and this is the title. So I need these 3 codes. I don't need the select, but I do need these 3 lines of code. And then I don't know if I need anything else. To create the chart, add chart, using this data source, and that will add that chart. So if I take all this other text out, I need to leave this in the sub, right? I need to leave that one in there. But I can take all this other code out. I'm left with 3 lines of code. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to come back to the Excel. I'm going to delete the chart one more time. I'm going to click inside the data table. And then I'm going to go into Insert. Let's see. Now I'm going to run the macro. So I'm going to click inside here. And I'm going to come over to the macro, click inside the macro, on the Run button, and I'm expecting it to create the same chart that we just created using just these 3 lines of code. And there it is. There's our monthly sales. There's an entire chart that we've just created with the macro. Pretty cool. And lastly, let's do number 5. An operation I often perform, this is the author, is to select a range of cells that contain numbers and format them as integers. That is, numbers with no decimals. This is easy to do with Excel's format cells, but it takes a few steps. If you record a macro for performing the operation, you can store it in your personal macro workbook and create a button to run this macro. Once you're finished, you'll always be a click away from formatting a range as an integer. Hint, select range of numbers before turning the recorder on. Your macro will then always work on the currently selected range. Okay, very cool. So let's create another file here. Actually, let me go back to my book 1 file. And I'm going to add a new sheet. And let's say that we have some numbers, 36.5, 37.8, 5, 52, 20. Here's our numbers. And what we want to do is we want to be able to select numbers on any workbook that we're in and format them to integers. So one way to do that is to record a macro, but storing this macro in our personal macro workbook. How about that? So I've selected the cells just like the hint told me. I'm going to start a macro. And let's do format as integer, no spaces. And this time I'm going to store the macro in my personal macro workbook. And this macro will be then available for me anytime I open Excel on this computer. I don't think it transfers to other computers. I think it's on this computer, this device, that the personal macro workbook works. I'll click OK, and it's now recording. So now I'm going to use the Format Cells menu item. Let's see, I like to do Control 1. Control F1 takes me to the Format Cells. So if I pull up my Format Cells option, I do Control F1. Control 1, not Control F1, Control 1. Let's do that one more time. So I've selected the cells. I want to format these as integers. I'm going to do Control 1. And what I want to do is just format them as integers with no decimal places. So I'm going to put the decimal places to 0. I'm going to click OK. And I've selected those numbers, so they're all going to be integers at this point. And now I'm going to stop the recording. Okay, so if we go to my personal macro workbook, which is this personal XLSB, let's see, I already have some other macros in here, so I have to go find it. Here it is, format as integer. And there's the code. So I now have a code that I can use Now we can take this macro code and we can add it to the QAT, which is the Quick Access Toolbar. The way we do that is we come up here to the Quick Access Toolbar, which is the top left of Excel, and there's a button here that says Customize Quick Access Toolbar. So we'll click on the Customize Quick Access Toolbar. We'll come down to More Commands. There's lots of different commands in here. The ones checked are the ones that are showing currently. We'll come down to More Commands. And from here, we'll select this drop down and we'll select macros. This will be a list of macros that are available to you. And if you scroll down to the personal XLSB, format as integer, which is the macro that we created right here, and we're going to add that to the Customize Quick Access Toolbar side. And we'll click OK. This is going to add a link to that macro at the very top of Excel, and you can run that macro whenever you'd like, whatever situation you're in. So here's that link for me. You can actually go in and change the icon too if you'd like. Let's test it. Let's create some more numbers here. 34.6, 27, 43.7, 22, something else, whatever some numbers are. And I'm going to select these numbers, and then I'm going to click on this shortcut now for the format as integer. And there we go. Those numbers are now formatted. So that is question